Chapter 6. Avoiding the Fire. Long before we reach the point of no return, and are compelled to choose freedom no matter what, we become masters of avoiding the fire of self-discovery. A normal false self-existence involves a cornucopia of clever avoidance techniques to evade and delay the day of reckoning, when all conditioning must be faced, felt, embraced, and transformed. The false self does this naturally, and applauds itself for its cunning ability to circumvent pain at every opportunity. Why would I choose pain? Only a fool or a masochist would choose pain. However, it's not about choosing pain. The choice was made long before the pain showed up in the body or your experiences. The conditioning of your identities, attachments, and expectations chose the pain for you, seemingly without your consent, but in fact with your true self's complete stamp of approval, since that's the most effective way to become aware of the messages it wants to send to you. You will hear many spiritually oriented people say, you don't have to learn through pain. You can grow through joy. Pain is not the only way to receive the self's messages, as I've explained in the chapter on the language of the self. The self offers us many, many opportunities to receive its messages in gentle and interesting ways. Most people do get some of these messages, but the ones that seem to appeal to the false self before it makes the choice to be truly free are usually molded by it to make its dream world more comfortable and appealing. I like the phrase Hollywood spirituality, or attempting to dance at two weddings, the dream world and reality. After you've made the choice to be truly free, the language of the self will direct you quickly and often pleasantly to what you need to look at and feel in the moment. But you must still stand in the fire of self-discovery, and that does tend to bring pain with it. Looking and genuinely feeling what's been buried within the depths of your unconsciousness, hiding or blocking your awareness of who you really are, is at the very least difficult. Easy, but difficult. The ability to look at and feel this hidden conditioning, however, becomes easier and easier once you feel the gentle touch of grace, as it transforms these blocks back into the nothingness from which they came. Suffering and pain. The concept of suffering, as it relates to any kind of pain, is the real bone of contention as spirituality sees it. As long as you live in a physical body, you'll experience pain. The body is needed in order for the God that you are to taste contrast, and those experiences bring with them a wide range of feelings from pain to ecstasy on every level. What creates the suffering is identification with being a victim, at the mercy of circumstances out there which cannot be fixed, changed, or controlled. However, when you give your attention to the God you are, you recognize that you are not your circumstances, which dance on the stage of identification, attachment, and expectation conditioning. You step off the stage as a witness into the audience, watching the play of life, still tethered to what conditioning you have not had transformed, but free of the suffering that comes with being a victim. It really is as simple as that. In order to discover who you really are by discovering who you are not, you need to be free of the agonizing distraction that suffering brings. Being a victim constantly draws your attention out there toward others and circumstances as the cause of your misery, which prevents you from feeling your conditioning so that it can be transformed. First, give your attention to who you are, God, I am that I am. And as this awareness expands, sitting in the audience as a witness is automatic and easy. Running. Running from what is uncomfortable is the most common form of delaying your freedom. Virtually everyone living in the dream world of the false self does it several times every day in ways that become so routine they hardly notice them at all. For example, let's say you are continuously late for your job, or you can't keep friends, or you very quickly become displeased with customer service. These are a few of the less obvious ways of running. Perhaps you've chosen a job or even a career for reasons that have little or nothing to do with what gives you joy. Hidden within this choice are many mirrors that will expose your conditioning, but you may be unable to look at them because you're afraid of the consequences of choosing to follow your real passion or purpose. A typical example we have seen portrayed in movies many times is the artist who followed his parents' wish to join them in their career field, such as the law or medicine or the family business, and put their joy on hold or gave it up altogether. What is the fearful outcome he or she doesn't want to look at? Disappointing the parents may be the surface fear, but in this case, being rejected or seen as less than may have scratched the unworthiness guilt wound all false selves have that began with the original separation from your God awareness. In this case, as in so many instances of running to avoid the fire of self-discovery, you're kept in an endless loop of frustration and resentment toward what appears to be the cause of your suffering. Always the cause lies within your conditioned identity, attachments, and expectation outcomes. But until genuine self-discovery has begun, you continue to look out there for answers. And a quote by Sadhguru, "Living in resentment is as violent as planting a bomb. The difference is just that the violence happens within you." Continually running from friend relationships may have to do with the avoidance of looking at what you hate in yourself. If this kind of running is a frequent thing, or if you avoid friendships altogether, your self-hatred covers much conditioning you cannot yet look at. Impatience with a customer service may be pointing at your own self-hatred through the conduct of others. These mirrors are right in your face and show up over and over again until you finally say, maybe it has something to do with me. This may lead to years of traditional therapies, which may lead to reshaping the false self, without ever touching the inner longing to be truly free of the false self. As I mentioned earlier, building self-esteem simply helps to keep the false self and its dream world of separation and limitation alive. Family relationships are usually the best environments to recognize the messages the self is trying to send you, since you're in close proximity to the mirrors it is using every day. It's also the most common place you run from on a regular basis, until you begin to really look at why you're getting the same message mirrors over and over again. It's usually much more difficult to run permanently away from a family relationship than it is to leave a job, a friendship, or perhaps stop eating at a restaurant where the service mirrors your self-hatred. However, until and if you choose to separate from the family physically, you've contrived many ways of running within the close quarters of the family unit. You may create your own special space in the house where you lose yourself in a hobby of some sort. You may become a clean freak, or engage in endless repairs or home alterations. You may join clubs and associations that take you away from home a lot. You may have a boys' or girls' night out that turn into more and more away time from the painful mirrors in your home. You may bury yourself in must-see television programs, or spend hours each day in texting or computer games. This is both running and distracting. There are many ways to run from the family, and its many mirrors without running away permanently. There's nothing wrong with any of these activities. It's the cause that may lie behind them that self-discovery addresses. In my case, I chose the ultimate running scenario. I departed the marriage, whether licensed or common law, 6 times. That's right, 6. Not much gray area there. Talk about fear of facing my conditioning. So if it sounds as if it can be really difficult, I do know where you're coming from. The truth is, though, once I got into it, I couldn't get enough, and despite the discomfort of feeling every gremlin-like identification, attachment, and expectation, I had an insatiable appetite for it once I saw how quickly grace transformed these illusionary demons and lifted weight after weight from my heart. Few running scenarios in a close family relationship, even if confronted and looked at, lead much below the surface of the painful mirrors, and at best end up in a list of compromises that the false self refers to as responsible, well-adjusted family. The false self has a laundry list of packages to bind up wounds in neat, comfortable bundles, to keep its secret life of separation, limitation, and illusions hidden. And a quote from A Course in Miracles, "The ego, or false self, likes to keep you mildly miserable." It's only when you can no longer take it, the dream, that is, that you choose freedom no matter what. My childhood was like a Third World War. My parents chose to shout, scream, throw things around, smash walls, and in my case use physical abuse to avoid their mirrors. Souls who have chosen to transform all conditioning from past lives in this lifetime choose families where every issue could be recreated so that each one would lie close to the surface for discovery later in life when the true inner work would begin. The family members who signed on for this kind of life, usually soul family members, hold a very deep love for the players on the stage, and play their often antagonizing roles with the deepest compassion beyond the veil of their awareness. Distraction delay. Distraction delay is a favorite of spiritually oriented people when it comes to the concept of being free now. If you take a close look at virtually every spiritual practice, procedure, belief system, modality, or method of attaining your freedom or liberation, as it was known in the old energy, you'll find words like growing, working on yourself, becoming, achieving, releasing, healing, accomplishing, realizing, conquering, and even succeeding. All these terms and many more speak of time and space in the world of separation that the false self lives within. As I've said before, if the false self achieves freedom, it literally ceases to exist. How truly motivated do you feel it is about this prospect? This is why the depth of the personal identity, the false self, not the body, is at the bottom of every fear, whether one is seeking freedom consciously or not. Everything the false self thinks, does, and acts on has within it a subtle or not so subtle fear of the death of its own identity, and it will avoid this at all costs. At first very subtly, but once you get close to your freedom, openly and viciously. Here are some of the things the false self says to itself that keeps it swimming in its own conditioning. Stark reminders that it exists. I'm a loser. I'm invisible. Everything happens to me. I can never get a break. I'm always broke. I'm too fat. I'm not pretty enough. I had a terrible childhood. I'm worthless. I'm a target for abuse. The big companies control everything in life. I can't seem to get in good relationships. I don't trust anyone. And on the separated victim talk goes. This kind of self-talk is the foundation of the conditioning that makes up the false self's identity prison, despite the misery attached to this prison. And this goes on to manifest the experiences that match these statements, what it calls reality. While the self-talk perpetuates these feelings, the action it takes is directly involved in removing these feelings, and that's why anything that makes it feel alive, important, and of value is very attractive. It's part of the inner conflict that goes on beneath the surface every moment of its false existence. The entire self-improvement industry is focused on making the false self feel more alive, safe, real, and important. For example, you can see this validated throughout the world if you look at how humanity worships celebrities today. They're the modern world's version of gods. Again, this is not a judgment, but how the self witnesses the movie of its tethered experience in the world of separation and limitation, without the suffering that accompanies identifying with these experiences. In fact, this hero worship of celebrities is so obvious now that it shows how the collective consciousness is open to exposing its dysfunctional conditioning through crystal clear mirrors that it cannot miss. The widespread popularity of so-called reality shows illustrates just how nonsensical the false self's version of reality really is. Beneath the often harsh appearance of world experience is the self orchestrating events perfectly to bring conscious attention toward transformation of conditioning. When life is fun and seems to be moving in an upward cycle for the false self, it's virtually impossible for the self to get through the messages it would have you hear. This false joy is one of the subtlest and most insidious distractions to becoming aware of your real freedom. But it is not the false self that seeks freedom. It's consciousness. An even more subtle and far more difficult distraction to become aware of exists in the spiritual community, which I call the smell the roses distraction. When someone has oriented their lives totally to spirituality and the eventual freedom it seems to promise, the contrast between the visible world and the world painted by various spiritual traditions is vast. At first it feels all warm and fuzzy, and most devotees devour its teachings like a starving beggar who has just been presented with a feast of tasty delights. When I was first introduced to spirituality in 1976, I had a coffee table at home with over 20 bookmarked volumes that I was reading simultaneously. My appetite for this wonderful new world was insatiable. After a while, most sincere devotees settle into a belief or tradition, usually combined with some disciplines or practices designed to realign their attention towards actual and eventual freedom and liberation from the illusion of the world they've lived until then. Others fall back into their daily routines and put off any serious attention toward their newfound interest, giving themselves a host of distraction delay tactics before they have the time to give it serious attention. I mentioned several of these distractions in an earlier chapter, such as someday, when the kids are gone, when I'm less material, when I meet the right guru, etc. The truth is, you give attention to what interests you the most, and as long as the dream world holds enough appeal, and the pain and suffering in it has not reached an intolerable level, you will continue to play in the fields of illusion. And that is exactly why you, as God, created this world, to play. That's how it's been until now. However, the eons of playing, unaware of who you really are, have ended, and everyone must now turn within and discover this. All world events and experience mirrors are turned on high now for this purpose. Back to the smell the roses distraction. There's a kind of dream within the dream trap that many devotees fall into, and it begins to reveal itself when they speak in a certain way when looking at their conditioning gets too close for comfort. Let's say you're having a conversation about some issue involving your childhood, and it triggers a painful memory. If you're not ready to go below smelling the roses of the warm and fuzzy aspect of spirituality, in the middle of the conversation you may distract by saying something like, "Oh, look at that beautiful sunset. It's a gift from God." Or, "We're so blessed to know each other. Isn't it wonderful?" Or, "Let's say a prayer for everyone who is," and then fill in the blank. Or, "I just love how you decorated your home with God's love." These kinds of words are oriented around a loving nature, so as I said, this is very subtle. If you're watching this kind of distraction, you may recognize it as something that just smells off. The conversation may have been headed straight towards some deeply buried conditioning, and it's just too uncomfortable to go there. So a bumper sticker spiritual phrase was used by the false self to instantly distract attention away from the fire. This is, as I said, a dream within a dream. The one distracting believes they're going with the flow by saying or doing something that sounds and feels spiritual. But they have not yet made the freedom, no matter what commitment, to themselves, so their self-discovery is only superficial, and it gets halted when the fire gets too hot. There's no fault here, nor is there with any distraction delays. Everyone reaches their level of intolerance for the dream world in their own way. For me, the frustration with my dream world had to be very extreme, and many jolts had to be applied, such as my near-death appendix episode, before I was ready to make the big jump. Sedating. Sedating is a quick way of running and distracting without necessarily acting out either of those ways of avoiding the fire of self-discovery. Consider people at a party after they've consumed a few drinks. Many people open up and allow suppressed feelings to be exposed. Tensions, longings, stress, doubt, suspicions, anger, rage, and hatred are a few of the most obvious ways people expose what they've been holding within. In some cases, so far beneath the surface that they surprise themselves at what they're saying and doing. In those cases, the sedating can have just the opposite effect of what the false self was trying to do. It can actually begin to reveal the tip of the iceberg of the conditioning that lies much deeper down. And in some of these instances, this can lead to a deeper examination of what came up and serve the higher purpose of self-discovery. But in most cases, the risk the false self took, that is, of being exposed, was worth it. The behavior it expresses usually confirms for the false self that they are less than, weak, and unworthy, but within a muffled kind of pain that is more acceptable than a full-on facing these conditions that partially defines the false self-identity. Full-blown addiction illustrates just how far the false self will go to hide its identity. The prevalence of sedation-type addictions, which also includes a multitude of prescription addictions, illustrates just how desperate the collective consciousness of the false self has become of being exposed globally. The powerful consciousness transformative energies that are being downloaded onto the planet to an increasing extent for about the last 3 decades, and particularly now as we enter the first few steps of the Golden Age, new energy, are violently shaking what has been stuck in the patriarchal, imbalanced masculine energies that we've been living in. As a result, what was very well hidden beneath many, many masks of fear has now become transparent. As a result, the pain of the collective false self being exposed is directly behind the massive increase in the drug trade that we've seen in the last few decades. No matter what may be done on the surface to try and control this kind of activity, as long as there's a demand, there'll somehow be a supply. And the demand is motivated by the false self's attempt to smother the pain of the conditioning that is now rising to the surface very quickly. Sedating is also often used by those who need grounding. They come in with their heads fully in the clouds and find it very difficult to live in the lower frequencies of the 3D dream world of separation and limitation. Many musicians, poets, authors, and a variety of artists often have a history of drug, alcohol, and sex abuse, to name a few. There are many notable examples in the entertainment field who have spent the greater portion of their adult life addicted to one form of drug or another. Many of these highly notable artists believe that some form of sedation, such as hallucinogenic drugs, actually open them up, that is, to a higher creative genius. But being open is their natural state. They waffle on the edge of multidimensionality all the time, and every form of sedation has the effect of muffling the high stress of wiring that does not yet resonate with the higher frequencies that are normal for them. The inspiration pouring through them cannot yet flow easily through their bodies and experience, so they seek some form of sedation to dampen the pain and confused energies and filter the intensity of the higher vibrations they're receiving. The body must be vibrating at a sufficiently high vibration in order to handle the load of a higher frequency energy, and many have not been able to do this without sedating. Just like the wiring of a house and the circuit breaker analogy I referred to earlier. The sedation temporarily tones down and balances the conflict of mixing dimensions, but leaves scars behind in the body, which make it more and more vulnerable to exhaustion and breakdown when the higher frequencies are flowing. This is why many artistic people seem to wear a mask of pain, often disguised as anger, rage, arrogance, sarcasm, cynicism, and abusiveness. All attempts to hide the depth of fear and frustration they're feeling, living in a dimension where they're unable to fully express what they're feeling. These have been the forerunners, the harbingers of a totally consciously aware God in a physical body, the promised heaven on earth. Why wouldn't they take the plunge into a little hell for the grand and beautiful experience that we will all soon share? Sedating with hallucinogenics is a very effective way to smooth conditioning temporarily. It does not open up higher dimensions. It reveals what you are already, and always are standing in as you. You may say, well, so what if it works? But what happens is a dependency on the temporary, which is a core definition of separation, and does not address the conditioning which, through self-discovery, transforms it back into the nothingness from which it came. Until one in this situation examines their false self-conditioning, these tendencies continue. For most, at best, the therapy they usually choose is rehab, which is a way of attempting to control their habits. Most such therapies advise their patients to admit that they're alcoholics or drug addicts as a way of releasing their denial. They are no such thing. They are God sleeping. Only the discovery of who you really are transforms the blocks that keep the body vibrating at a frequency lower than the incoming energies, in this case called inspiration. Attempting to manage or control imbalanced energy simply shifts its effects somewhere else. Alcohol or drugs may be traded for tyranny in the workplace or abusiveness in relationships, or symptoms of dictatorship on a small or even large scale. If outer symptoms do not appear, inner mental imbalances may be going on, such as paranoia, disillusions, obsessive behavior, and a host of others. When you finally make the choice to be free, no matter what, you become increasingly transparent and gradually let go of your resistance to looking at the deeper aspects of your conditioning that are blocking your awareness of who you really are. This allows energies to flow that transform the cells of your body and DNA so that it can effortlessly resonate with higher and higher vibrations. When you become aware of who you really are, God, you become consciously multidimensional and can vibrate on many levels simultaneously, eventually on all so-called levels. We see this in the savant-like children that are showing up everywhere now, whose bodies are already resonating with the higher frequencies as they're born into the new energy. No matter what method the false self uses to avoid the fire of discovering who it is not, when you arrive at the moment when you've had enough, miracles literally fall in your lap. The running, distracting, delaying, and sedating are faced for what they are, and sooner or later they're all dropped. You make the choice to be free no matter what, and deep within you say, yes, bring it on. And that opens you up immediately to a flood of conditioning to feel, embrace, and have transformed. It's important and encouraging to remember, though, that once you've given yourself this incredible gift, you will very quickly find yourself in the audience as a witness to your tethered false self on the stage of its dream world, knowing that it is not who you are. And from that free perspective, the layers of conditioning fall away like dried leaves from the trees in autumn. And here's a quote from Papa G. Once you consciously know you are free, desires will arise, but they will not have a ground, because these will be roasted seeds. They will not have sprouted in memory. You will already know the end. Only an instant is required for this recognition. Once only. Just a moment. Look into and recognize yourself within this instant. You don't need a long program spread over years to recognize this freedom. You're already free. It's only recognition or awareness that isn't there, that you are postponing it. You must recognize your own nature or self, or you will not be happy.